Hello, my name is Dalian Adofo. Welcome to Communiversity. Class is now in session.
Communiversity is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, The Black Secret. Are you ready to dive deep into Black history, economics, wealth building, and self-empowerment? The Black Secret is offering exclusive courses by none other than the Black history man himself, Robin Walker. This is the most powerful Black studies course, an offer for the entire Black world. And guess what? You can get started today by simply using our special link, which you can find in the video description. Be sure to apply our coupon code KIMBUNGA to get another 20% off your membership. And there's more! Want to get a taste of what the Black Secret has to offer? You can also claim the book 100 Black History Facts absolutely free. Link in the description. So what are you waiting for? Expand your mind, unlock a world of knowledge, claim your free book, and let the Black Secret guide you on a journey of discovery and empowerment.
Click on the link below or subscribe to get more information. Class is in session.
Today's topic that we're going to be covering in some extensive detail is African spirituality. We're going to be looking at what African spirituality entails and the actual benefits that it has for individuals, yes, who choose to explore the ways, the principles, and the practices that are held within African spirituality. African spirituality still remains one of the most misunderstood and largely vilified topics that we have today. Because when you mention the word African spirituality, first of all, some of the first images that are evoked for you are people doing what might seem like very bizarre things. So, one of the main terms of stigmatization is that it's superstitious, or it's backward. It looks very primitive. And primitive, by the way, not meaning that it's necessarily anything bad. It just means it's the first expression that we have. So before we had anything called religion, we had spirituality. And we still have spirituality because spirituality is intricately tied into nature and the forces and forms that we find within nature. When you also mention the topic of African spirituality, one of the main things you get from people will be, but how can you have African spirituality? It sounds like something that's a monolith, and that is not possible because they're different, and however many groups or tribes of Africans, how does that work? And what again this reflects is how much we misunderstand about what African spirituality is. We might have different expressions of a culture, but then when you look at the philosophy, the principles that create those outward expressions, we find that we do have such a system that we can put under the umbrella of African spirituality. Because there are 5 main ideas, and obviously there's more, but for the purposes of this presentation, we'll keep it to the 5 core tenets or ideas that we find within what we call African spirituality. So the very first is the notion of a creative source, meaning where all things come from. You will note that I will try my possible best not to use the word God, because what we've been led to understand about what God is, or this highest expression of everything that comes into being from the religious channels, if you will, is that God is this man and he lives in this place. So from whether you're a Rastafarian to a Israelite, you find that the term for God is always him, he, him, he. Yeah, it's a very limiting concept to understand the source of all creation, because the very obvious question that you can throw out is, but if it's a he, where did he know where she is? Because it's very different in the African conception, which I'll get to. So our very first concept, or should we call it interconnecting concept, is the notion of a supreme being or a creative source, a source from which everything comes forward. Then we also have a working with or understanding of natural forces. Yes, in every African spiritual or cultural expression, there's that working with what we will call natural forces. Some people like to call them deities, but again, this doesn't really give us the full picture of how Africans conceptualize or work with these natural forces. The third tenet or main idea that binds together all the various different expressions is this notion of every human being having what we call a divine destiny, meaning you take on this physical form for a reason. There's a reason why you have taken the form that you have on, because you're here to fulfill a particular purpose that contributes to the larger community or even, world cohesion. Okay, so this is the third idea, that notion of divine destiny. So that falls under humanity and why we have human beings and what we're here to do. The fourth idea is the work with the ancestors. Okay, the ability to keep what the Congo scholar Bafukia called your biogenetic rope, what modern science calls your chromosomic memory, or the ancestral information held within your DNA. This is what the notion of ancestorhood covers. Okay, and we find that again across every African community or tribe, for lack of a better word. Then the last and also very equally important, we can call the rituals, invocations, or be it prayer forms, the ways in which Africans just remember and venerate this source of creation, which they do not see themselves as separate from. And this can involve a range of invocation systems, because an invocation is not really the same as a prayer. Include things like drumming, dancing, singing. And these are not just in the secular way that we know them today. They're very, very important uses that we can put what are essentially sonic energy, vibrations, frequencies. That's what these tools create, and there are various things that we can do with that. So just capping all that back, today's topic is about African spirituality, and we're going to be looking at the 5 main core tenets that we find across any form of African expression that we know. So the first is the conceptions of the creative source. The second being the natural forces and the way in which we live and work with these. The third being our purpose for living, our existence, and our divine destiny. What does that cover? What does that mean? The fourth being the ancestors and our communication or relationship with our ancestors. And the final one is the type of rituals and invocations that we find within African spirituality. So for this class today, we're going to be drawing much of the information from the book Ancestral Voices, Spirit is Eternal. This is a book that has our research findings all condensed into one. We're going to draw some of them out. We most likely can't do all, otherwise it's going to be a very long lecture series. But what I'm going to focus on will be those principles, those key ideas that are most useful for the practical way that we live our lives. Because African spirituality, first and foremost, it's not like a religion, if you will. It's not something that you just hold in your intellectual space. What you hold in the intellect, you should be able to bring it into the physical as well. And this underlines a very key concept anyway within African spirituality, which is the dichotomy of life. That apart from your physical body, you also have a spiritual body, if you will. And it's these two together that make your total beingness. A bit similar to that yin and yang concept that we find in the Eastern philosophies. Okay, so the first area we're looking at is the conceptions of the creative source, what most people might call God. Now, one of the fundamental differences and reasons as to why I would not be using that word God, even though it helps with most of us understand what exactly I'm referring to, is the fact that that notion of God, as I've previously said, is very limited. It just has this singular entity, and from this singular entity, every possible shape and form that we know comes from that. The African perspective is slightly different. It doesn't rather try to define that source, but it looks to what's already in existence to use it to conceptualize that source. So this creative source, first of all and foremost, is not a single thing. So I'm going to cover 4 main ideas that we find within the African conception of God. Now, in each and every African spiritual system, there is that notion of this supreme being. Yeah, and there's not a single one. That idea of Africans worshiping their ancestors is nothing but colonial propaganda, because every African community has its own notion of that supreme being or source. Examples, for instance, this is kind of from the well-known corpus, might be Oludumare in the Yoruba system, or Chuku in the Igbo system, or the Akans have Nyame, and the Zulus have Unkulu. Every system has this notion, so it's not new to Africans, okay? But there are 4 main ideas that we're going to discuss. So the first of these concepts that I'm going to cover is the idea of the creative source being nature itself, okay? All the expressions that you find within nature, the air, the earth, the plants, even the planets that we see in the galaxy beyond. And when you look to this idea of this creative source being nature, what again we cannot doubt is, if you're a religious person, you find that they give the notion of God 3 ideas. That God is omnipotent, meaning all-powerful. God is omniscient, meaning all-knowing. And then God is omnipresent, meaning being everywhere. But then when we look into these religious ideas, we find that they also tell us that God lives in heaven. So you cannot be omnipresent if you live in a place. That is one of his first, if you want to call it, contradictions. God cannot live in heaven if God is supposed to be everywhere at every time. It makes no sense. So in the African conception, though, we find that nature is omnipresent. It's everywhere. Everywhere you go, you can breathe. Air is ever present. Air actually keeps you more alive than any nutrient that you can get from any plant. So the notion of air and how it connects to our breath. Remember, if I hold your breath now for even anything more than 5 minutes, you will die. You will lose your physical expression, who you are. Your spirit will leave your body. So this already even shows the importance of nature in sustaining you, the human being. It's not some invisible person out somewhere who's keeping you alive. It's the very elements of nature. The air we breathe, without it, we can't live. Where again do we get elements that we need to sustain our lives? Water, again, that's a part of nature, right? The fruits, the plants, the food that we get, again, where do we get them from? They are part of nature. Now, most religious people tell you, oh yeah, God made those things and put them there, which reflects God's power. What the African rather looks at is, it appreciates the thing itself, rather than give that accolade to something that cannot be seen. So nature is everywhere. We need it everywhere. Without breath, there's no life. So nature shows us that it's omnipresent, omniscient. How does the sun know when to set so the moon can come in? How does the moon know how to go around the earth for a certain number of days, so we end up from having a no or new moon to a full moon? And how is it that it's able to regulate this process with, for instance, the woman's menstrual cycle? Yes, that already shows us that the very expressions of nature we see come with an inbuilt type of intelligence. And that intelligence connects all of us. Yes, because you have to ask yourself, how the moon is moving in what looks like thousands of miles away from you be able to affect a woman's body? How is it able to affect your mental state at certain times in that cycle? It's because you're connected to that moon. So nature is that God that most people are looking for. The last one is the power of that of this nature. Yes, Japan being lauded as the most technologically advanced nation in the world, it took one tsunami to nearly destroy half of that society. That was just one wave. Now imagine which other powers. Look at Australia. Recently we had all these bushfires and whatnot, and we seem totally powerless. So nature fulfills all these three ideas: omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. So one of the key conceptions we find within African spirituality is the creative source, or God, being nature itself. And this nature, we are part of this nature. Okay, so we are also expressions of this creative source, or God. Because guess what? When we die, or our spirit or our energy leaves the body, and we put this body in the earth, the body eventually becomes no different to the earth. Yeah, so the soil that we see is human beings and rocks which have slowly over years eroded and are a part of that life-giving structure. So again, we have this connection and reflection of that idea that you are God. But we're taught to be fearful of God. But that's a religious thing anyway. So that's the first conception of the creative source being nature. The second idea, which I think is very important, because it's very important for all of us, is the idea of God, or the creative source, embodying the feminine principle. Now, when I say that, I would like for us not to think of the feminine principle just in terms of gender, that you have to be a woman, you know, you have to have a woman's anatomy for this to be described or being described about you. So one of the first places where we have, should we say, sculptures depicting this notion of God is in the Nile Valley, where we have the pregnant hippopotamus Taweret, okay, which represents this concept of each and every human being having the ability to create, because that's what the concept actually denotes. It's not that God is a pregnant hippopotamus, or the creative source, just we all come from hippos. No, it's denoting the idea of being able to bring forth life. It's really speaking about our creative faculties and what we're able to produce. Yes, when we're using our mental faculties right. So this notion of the creative source being feminine reminds us of our ability to create, to produce, just like the same way a woman will give birth to a living life form. But we can give birth to ideas and concepts that we find in our mental space. So that's a very key principle for all of us in terms of what we think we're capable of doing, our potential. Okay. The third one, which is very key, is the notion of the creative source being energy and just consciousness. Why this is important, and I've chosen that one as well to pick up on, is because we all have these experiences. Yes, you might be there one day, you think of someone, you walk down the road, next minute you see the person. Where did this person come from? And why is it that they've manifested in that same instance that you've taught about them? Because it speaks to us realizing that what we call our mind is not just a collection of memories over our lifetime. Our minds plugs into vast amounts of knowledge, yeah, be it about the universe, be it about our fellow people, and keeps us connected. So, you know, if we look at all the things that are in creation, for instance, let's say a mobile phone, for instance, or a chair, that image had to appear to someone in their mind first for them to bring a physical representation of it. Where did that object, where does it exist? If it exists in the mind, that then also tells you that your mind is like a place. Yes, and it's a place from which we draw ideas or information that we then re-represent them or have a physical equivalent of them. So again, this very idea also ties into the first notion I mentioned, the idea of dichotomy in the way we live. There's a physical element and then there's a spiritual element. And when we're working these two together, this This is when we're working at our fullest of potential. So this third concept of the creative source being nothing but pure energy and consciousness is very key. And again, we find modern science slowly catching up, where we find that now it's a given or a proven. People no longer, should we say, dispute the concept of everything in creation is just different forms of energy. In different mind states. Your mind might be the most intangible aspect. It's a bit like the air. And then your body as a physical embodiment is just atoms or electrons vibrating at a lower speed. So it gives form. Yes. So we need to, the idea that the creative source is just spirit speaks to us of, again, how we're connected to each other all through our minds. Okay. And then the last one, which again reinforces the idea of your God, is that this creative source is your oldest ancestor. That might sound funny to some of us, but then you think about it. You have two parents and they have two parents. They also have another two parents before them. And then if we keep following this continuum, where would we arrive at? We will arrive at this creative source we're talking about. So we, the human being, you are just an extension along a very long line that comes from that source. So within you, whether it's in your DNA or it's in your mental space itself, is a lot of information that you can access, that you can bring forth. And this is where some of the spiritual practices that I'll be covering are designed to do. They're designed to help you remember some of this information so you can put it forth, or rather, so you can put it to good use in your life. Okay? So the 4 conceptions of the creative source that I've covered so far within African spirituality, which again has possibly the most important uses for us in a practical way, is the first being the concept of the creative source as nature, because nature is what sustains us, nothing else. Everything else is imagined. When you buy a mango, you know which tree that mango comes from. It didn't just drop out of the sky with some big hand. It came from a tree. So that's your creator there, because it's sustaining your life. The second concept is that the creative source as a feminine principle, meaning you have the capability and ability to bring forth your ideas that you hold in your head. You can give them physical form. The third is that the creative source is pure energy and consciousness, the same thing which you hold in what we call our heads. The ancient Egyptians, I believe, referred to, even though it was conceived as a neter, Tehuti, just means divine consciousness. Everybody has a mind in their heads. It's more about learning how to structure, to prime, and to use that mental energy to your benefit. That's how you show your God consciousness in operation. And then the fourth is the importance of our ancestors. Because you, the human being, you are sum total of everybody that came before you. Everything that you think is you is actually not you. It is an aspect of an ancestor from before that you draw on, whether you're conscious or not conscious of it. So these are the 4 main. There are other principles, as I said, but we're covering the main 4 that I feel will have the most practical use for you in your life. Because African spirituality has a functional purpose. Yeah, it's not just, it makes you feel good because you think you've done one good deed here and there, so you're going to some place called heaven. No, it's about how do you live with the people that you find in your life to encourage cohesion for everyone else. So that's the first part of the session, which is about the conception of the creative source. The second area that again is a mainstay across all the various expressions of African spirituality that we find is nature, or the natural forces that operate within nature. Why these are important for anyone on the journey of spiritual discovery of themselves, and why it's so key in African spirituality, is the fact that we are nature. Yeah, we're not separate or different to nature. At the beginning of the session, in the first part, when I was speaking about the conceptions of the creative source. I covered the area of what happens to the body when we pass or when we die or transition. You know, there's various ways of describing that process based on your understanding of it. So when you transition, we find that we can no longer find what we might call your spirit, that animating spark that keeps you alive, that you can see is animating me now. I can speak to you. When they say I'm dead, I can't have any more of these animations anymore. That means something has left my body. It's no longer there. This animating spark, where does it go? Because no one can find it. It's not like a computer hard drive where we can locate a computer's memories and files and whatnot. Where do our memories go? It goes back to the ether, the same air that we're breathing. Okay? But your body, when it's put in the earth, becomes part of the earth. It becomes soil. So even both aspects of your body reminds you why you are nature. And nature again is you. So if you're working with this understanding or this principle in mind, the way you start to interact with nature totally changes. Because you don't just look at nature as, I guess, something that looks or makes your environment look good. You start to recognize it as an active participant in your life. And this is why you find that, for instance, certain animals that you might see at a certain time of the day, even certain experiences that you might get caught out in a storm, let's say, and you will get science from nature that tells you how to go through particular events, experiences that are happening in your life. So nature first and foremost becomes a teacher or a guide to you along your journey. Now, within various systems, this understanding exists. In some, it's a bit more pronounced, or rather well systemized and explained than others. So one of the key ones I'm going to use, and we have to be very careful to remember that just because I use that as an example, I'm not suggesting that this is the best or the only system anyone should explore. Remember at the very beginning I said all these systems are the same in terms of their grounding philosophy and principles. It's just how we express these principles that make them seem different. So the natural forces, again, we find them in every system. The ancient black Egyptians used to call it them, the Neter or the Neterus, yeah, which again just means forces that we find within nature. Possibly the most popular term for them, though, that we know in modern usage now is the Orisha, which comes from the Yoruba IFA system from Nigeria. Yeah, the Akans in Ghana have the same. They call them the Abosum or Obosum. The Igbos, they also have it. It's called the Odinani. And these are just various natural processes that we see external to us, what we call nature. But these processes also are really attempts to describe processes that go on within the human body. Okay, so we'll take one of these principles. Again, we have to stick in the, should we say, the area that most people are most aware. We have this principle called Ogun, which most people sadly only seem to keep it at a very surface level, and they will correlate Ogun to like Mercury from the Roman corpus and say, oh, Ogun was the god of war because he has all these metals around him. But then when you look at these principles from a philosophical aspect, and even what we might call a Western scientific aspect, we can see that what Ogun refers to is the principle of transformation. Because we get iron ore from the earth, and it looks nothing like the things that we can use it to create. Like, for instance, jewelry, be it like a watch. In this case, I don't have anything else metallic. Yeah, jewelry, necklaces. We transform that ore. That ore has a feature of malleability. What this speaks to for you, the individual, and remember, iron is one of the biggest components of the human body. Iron is what gives you your blood. Iron is what strengthens your bones. So the iron within you correlates with the iron ore that we find in the earth. So the Ogun, as a principle, if you're sticking with it in this personalized principle, as a kind of human factor, you only look for that human aspect, but you need to see it mainly from its principle aspect, because then you can see how it applies to your life. Okay, so there's no, should we say, Ogun outside, but the Ogun that exists in your red blood cells, and how or what potential does it hold for you in how you live your life. Yeah, in terms of how you transform, how you grow, how you learn to take in new information, so you become a better person each day. That's just one of the ideas. Okay, we have this other idea also of they call Shango. Now Shango, as many scholars will contend, was an actual historical figure. They said he was a king in modern day Nigeria, and he was a very wild or very hot-tempered person, so was very quick to and prone to make rash decisions, which eventually ended up costing him his life. They also correlate Shango with what we call lightning, yeah, and electricity. Now, if you look at that again, you could look at these outside elements and not understand the principle. But then even yourself as a human body, everyone here has experienced it. You walk across carpet, yes, for a while, you find that your body generates electricity. So within your body, and we know this because our thoughts, when we look at them under some of these scientific instruments, you don't see pictures, you see electrical synapses exchanging information. So again, this is where it becomes crucial that we don't get stuck on the physical representations, but we understand the principles. So when you look at Shango in more depth, one of the key correlations is that it's illuminating. And this is what lightning does in a dark place. Lightning strikes, you can see more. So Shango as a principle will call to you to broaden your horizons, to broaden your understanding. Okay? Ogun as a principle will be speaking to you to look at ways in which you can transform yourself each and every day. Yes? So these natural forces are not just people or just personalities. We have to engage with them on a principle level and find out to what use we can put these principles to use in our lives. Okay, one of the things that is also key for us to understand when we go into the development of our minds and the way we engage with these principles on a mental level, we have modern science now telling us, or confirming what's already known rather, in this branch of science known as neuro-linguistic programming. You know, as a teacher, I've come across neuro-linguistic programming quite often, and I've seen the ranges of use that we can put neuro-linguistic programming to. It tells us that the mind has a very high function ability, to the degree that we can actually change ourselves on a molecular level from the thoughts that we entertain. You know, there was that Japanese physicist who did some experiments with water where he would speak into the water and overnight you would see its molecular structure change. This speaks to the power, yes, of things that we take for granted every day. We think me talking to you like this is just words coming out of my mouth, but these words can change your mind. It can change your thinking process. It can actually effect a change in your whole lifestyle. So in the African conception, these powers within nature are recognized for their abilities to also cause a change in the human being. They're just not mythological stories, again, about, I don't know, Zeus or Apollo, which really has nothing to do with how we see ourselves. In the African perspective, these stories contain valuable scientific information because this is a natural science. It deals with nature and the science of nature. But again, we have to look beyond the story in its simplicity, to look at it from a place of philosophy, to understand the lessons within those stories and how to apply them in our lives. That's what the natural forces hold for us.
Communiversity is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, The Black Secret. Are you ready to dive deep into Black history, economics, wealth building, and self-empowerment? The Black Secret is offering exclusive courses by none other than the Black history man himself, Robin Walker. This is the most powerful Black studies course on offer for the entire Black world. And guess what? You can get started today by simply using our special link, which you can find in the video description. Be sure to apply our coupon code KIMBUNGA to get another 20% off your membership. And there's more! Want to get a taste of what the Black Secret has to offer? You can also claim the book 100 Black History Facts absolutely free. Link in the description. So what are you waiting for? Expand your mind, unlock a world of knowledge, claim your free book, and let the Black Secret guide you on a journey of discovery and empowerment.
Click on the link below or subscribe to get more information. Class is in session.
Now, the third area or the third concept that we find as a main tenet within all the expressions of African spirituality is the notion that each and every human being manifests physically for a reason. This reason is largely termed as your divine destiny. There's many names for it across the various systems. The Akans call it your Kra or your Hebre. The Yorubas have the concept of Ori. You know, even where they don't have a set idea for it, you still find that it will be talked about as this child was born for a reason, for a purpose. You came here for a reason. It's not just your mom and dad having fun for no reason. That you've come into the world, there's a reason for you. The Dagaras, I like the way the concept is explained. They call it your medicine. That you, each and every individual has come here with a particular medicine to help heal the world. Okay? So the issue though is that from passing through that, if you want to call it spiritual realm, because a child in his mother's womb only sees the same darkness that we see at night, or the same darkness that we see when we shut our eyes, because we go back into this space. Okay? So by taking the physical form, we then have this task of achieving this purpose. And the way we achieve this purpose, especially now in the current age where we live, where we don't live in these close-knit communities anymore, where we can, you know, have knowledge of maybe somebody's genealogical history, you know, who your dad, your grandparents are, and how that leads to who you are and who you can become. We now start to have to use a lot of extra things that have always been used to try and identify this purpose. And one of the key teaching aids is the dreams that we have. Yes, most people might think, okay, the dream is just a reaction to some food eaten, but some dreams can be prophetic, some can be informational, and then you can have some which are just, in a sense, your general run-of-the-mill dream that really might not serve any functions. So it becomes incumbent on you to say, I'm going to learn maybe a bit about dream interpretation. Because then when you have these dreams that seem weird, you can then decode the message within the dream. Because it might give you clues as to the things you need to do to take you closer to that purpose, to take you closer to that state of fullness, because that is really what this concept of your divine purpose is talking about. It's talking about your ability to be the best of yourself, and that best of yourself will involve many talents, many abilities, and many skills. So the concept calls us to do more than what we think we're capable of. Okay, and not just in the dreams, we also, as I said, the type of animals that we see. For some people, they tend to see a lot of double-digit numbers. You start to see these repeating patterns, okay? You can relate that to this concept that we have in Western science now called the Fibonacci sequence, which you have constantly increasing in set increments of numbers that keep going and they form what we call the beautiful shapes in nature. Again, your life is a reflection of that same thing. But you have to provide yourself with the tools, especially now when we don't have knowledge systems largely around where you can initiate into and be taught that knowledge. Now you have to call in through your own ancestral memory largely, especially for those of us who we find in the West. But the good news is that information is already yours. You know it within. It becomes a process of learning to bring it out. So as I said, the first thing we need to really get into is the dreams that we have and learning to decipher them for the messages that they hold. The other thing being the type of animals or natural forces that we seem to have an affinity towards. You know, if you've been seeing a lot of cats, for instance, there's a message for you there. And you need to try and understand how does the attributes or the features of the cat reflect something valuable for you. It could be maybe a change you need to have in your personality or a certain attribute you need to develop more. Maybe you need to be a bit more cunning. You know, there are all these different lessons that these animals can teach us, which is why you find that in most African communities, they all have totems of particular animals. And you will find that that animal will reflect the community in a certain way. They become teaching aids. Okay. The last thing as well, beyond that, again, is your mind and how important it is for you to make consistent efforts. So to find time to think, those quiet moments, you know, I wouldn't want to call it a meditation because now when you say meditate, you start to think of, you know, someone sat in the lotus position, like they're trying to emulate the Buddha and then they're doing all these. No, it can be as simple as you just being in a quiet space and finding time to think and to think deeply. This is one of the most easiest ways to open your connection to spirit. Because remember what I said in the first two sections, your mind connects directly to the source. And the more you find these moments of quiet time, of listening to yourself, you start to realize that even the things you call your thoughts, you can tell which ones are yours and which one is a conversation that you're having with someone else. It could be an ancestor. It could be another form of energy. Yeah, but they're all guiding you towards something. It becomes very important for you to make the time for that and also to trust in the process. Yes, because you're here to fulfill that destiny. And it's a matter of trusting the process so that, yeah, you're convinced or you're sure of the journey that you're walking in. So that divine or that concept of the divine destiny gives each and every one of us, it's almost like a motivational tool to aid us to know there's more to us than we even know. And that's what the concept of the divine destiny covers. The fourth area that we're going to cover is one of the most important areas in African spirituality. Because even beyond all the various systems that we have, this cuts across all of those. Because, you know, you can be, for instance, just using myself as an example, I can go and initiate into the Zulu system, maybe because I'm impressed by certain rituals they have. But all of that doesn't really matter, or you won't even get much of an impact from any of those if there's one thing you've ignored. And this is the key and most important aspect, which is the ancestors. Yes, or your connection with your ancestral lineage. This becomes very, very important. Because if you remember at the very beginning, when I was talking about the conceptions of the creative source, I told you one of the ways Africans see this creative source or God or whatever term you want to call it, is that the creator is your oldest ancestor. Because that is the source from where you come. And again, as I mentioned in the chapter before, when you close your eyes and you see this darkness, that looks like you're looking into outer space. Is outer space in your head, or is outer space when you open your eyes and you look into the sky? You're a microcosm of that wide universe. So can you imagine how much information you can actually channel through? Which I just said in the previous section, this is why you need to find time. 10, 15 minutes every day, just in silence, thinking. because what you're doing there is you're opening up portals within your mind that you can never do when you're busy talking or always here, there, everywhere, so busy to achieve. Most of your achievement will be done in silence, believe it or not. So your ancestors, you are your ancestors, because everything that you are, as I said, even the way you smile, sometimes you see a child and you're like, oh, your smile is just like your father's or your mother's. So this child now inherits the exact same type of smile as their parent. Are they their parent or is their parent them? What it shows you is the continuation, as I mentioned earlier, of what the Congo scholar called your biogenetic rope, because this is, you can view it like a rope that ties us. It takes us from our present and takes us all the way back to however far back. This same biogenetic rope, because I like that term, I use it quite a lot, also again ties us to that original consciousness. Okay, so by working with various rituals that can increase our connection to our ancestors, we start to remember things. Yes, because all you're actually doing is you're activating aspects of, or aspects within your own cellular structure to give you a certain consciousness. This is how your mind works, which is why with ancestors you need a space for them. Okay, an altar or a shrine. A shrine is a larger form of an altar, because a shrine normally is for a wider community. But you need an altar space where you show veneration to your ancestors. And you don't need to do anything fancy or anything big. This is just you creating a space which you make sacred, because you're trying to have this dialogue with people who have or have contributed to the memories you have in your head. And this is where you can have your sit down moments, your quiet moments, as I said, where you direct your mind. Because again, let's not forget, what we call the mind is a form of energy. This is why you can think so much, you give yourself a headache, and then your head starts to warm up. How is it that simple thoughts can actually make your head hot? How do thoughts generate energy such that your head can become warm, and then all of a sudden you have a headache too? So your thoughts, as I said before, are not just pretty pictures and images or recollections of past events. Your thoughts are actually potential energy that you can turn from what you see here into physical things. And again, as I've invited you to do, look around everything that you see. When we make these inventions, we first see these items in our mind. But our mind is not a physical place, or so we've been taught to believe. How do we get these images from our mind and then bring them into the physical reality? Is the chair, let's say the chair that we have here, is this chair just here, or does it also exist in the first mind space where it was conceived? Right? So we're again dealing with this duality. There's the physical representation, and then there was an intangible representation, what we can call a spiritual one, because it had no form. Its form was only in your mind, and then now you've brought it forward. So our connection to our ancestors starts first in the mind. Okay? If we look at the 7 universal laws that Africans identified back in ancient times in the Nile Valley, the very first universal law is the law of mentalism, which states that everything is mind. And when you think about it too, this is how we live. Your thoughts begin everything else. So with our ancestors, we need to keep this communication open, because again, as I've told you, each aspect of yourself that you think is you is something inherited. And when Western science caught up most recently, they gave you a name. They call it a chromosomic memory. And they tell you that every phobia, fear, or everything else that you have has a genetic marker that comes from an ancestor beforehand. But remember, Africans have always known this, which is why ancestral communication is the core element within any practice. So as I said, before you've even bothered to try and go and initiate into this or that, you need to be able to have a weekly ritual of some sort that you do for your ancestors. And as I said, even if it's just sitting in 5 minutes in silence and just thinking about them. What could my grandfather have been like? What could my grandmother have been like? Just asking yourself these questions. And then you just watch how the activity in your mind starts to change and how you start to realize voices beyond what you might call your own thoughts at play, all working for your own good. So ancestral communication, key. You need to find a space where you can designate a small altar. So I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. If you don't even have pictures of your ancestors, that's okay. But just taking that time out to, let's say, light a candle and put a glass of water, and you sitting there for 10, 15 minutes, pondering on these questions. That very act, as simple as it might seem to you, is an act of strong power. Because what you're doing is saying that I am creating this in this moment. This is, you're exhibiting an aspect of what we associate only with this idea of God, that God creates. God created everything that we see in this universe. But we also create. This is why people have chairs, cameras, lights. Human beings are creators too. So for you to access this God consciousness, you have to go through it, through your DNA, through your ancestors, and back to that source. Because we all come from that source. So at least one day a week where you sit down for 5 minutes to say, you know what? It might not seem like much, but the fact that I woke up this morning and I still have life, it's a big gift. So thank you for letting me still have this gift. And just guide me on how I can move forward and attain more to add to your memory. And just watch how, again, as I said, your mental faculties change. Yes, so we have two types of ancestors. Those that are within your lineage, meaning your blood or your family, which you will find within your chromosomes or your DNA, and who you can call forth. But also you can even call on the energies of those who you might not be related to by blood. Because remember, everything is first and foremost energy. So the physical component doesn't restrict the spiritual component. So you can call. Our spirits are part of the ether, this very air that we breathe. So if this air keeps us alive, so also can we harness information from this energy. And again, these things we learn first by experience. So as unbelievable as it may sound, the first step to knowledge is to practice. You have to apply that knowledge. So you have to find out for yourself, because it becomes an individual journey. And the reason why you can tap into the consciousness of those who might not be in your blood is related to this concept of Ubuntu, which is again another spiritual concept that we find more from the southern regions. It's given it a name, but again we find it in all African traditions, which is we're all connected. This is why you can meet people and they might be telling you A, but you get a sense that no, actually they mean B, because you can read their energy. This is again also what underlines what we call divinations. Yes, so the diviner is not some all-knowing person. You've walked to their space with some form of energy. And energy, you can see, we have different forms, because this is why sometimes you might be angry, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. These are all just manifestations of the type of energy you might be holding within yourselves, firstly from your mind. So that is what the diviner will read. And you can read that energy yourself too. So a deified ancestor is somebody who's done work for the benefit of everybody. So we can bring to mind people like Omo Awo, Malcolm X, who I've mentioned before, or even the Martin Luthers of this world, or the Rosa Parks, because these are people who give selflessly, not just for their family. You know, if you're doing things for the benefit of your family, we can all understand that. You look after number one first. But those who become deified, so for instance, Dalian of Haiti was deified and added to the Loa, or forces of nature in Haiti, because he was one of the key figures in the liberation movement. He sacrificed himself so others could have freedom. And so all those who've come before us, we have that obligation to them, because we might not be here, you might not be seeing me on this camera right now having this conversation. Me and you would be on a big plantation working for the benefit of some European. That's what could have been the reality now. So giving that respect or veneration also comes back to you, because life, again, it's a cycle. In the African system, time doesn't go in a linear line. It goes and it repeats itself. It's a cyclical reference of time. Okay, so what you're giving, you get back. Yeah, so this is where and why ancestors are very important. So the final and the last tenet within African spirituality that I'll be discussing today are some of the practices, yes, what people might largely term rituals that we find within African spirituality. And as I've said from before, a ritual, when you hear that word, it might generate this idea of what you see in your Hollywood movies, but that's not what a ritual is. If you think of even the way a day is set, you have the sun that occupies a certain amount of time, and then that is followed by the moon coming in to give a particular, if you want to call it, atmosphere to the day. So we have day and we have night, and these rotate over and over again. We have seasons which take place at different times of what we might call the year or a cycle. And all that this does is it's the continuation of life. So that's exactly what a ritual is. A ritual allows you to tap into or to feed into this cycle of life. Okay, and I'm going to discuss, there's a lot of rituals that are available, but I'm going to discuss three main ones, especially because some of them you might be familiar with already. And it will be a good way to segue you into ritual, if you will. Now, ritual, again, is at its very essence is a expression of energy. And remember what I've said before, everything in physical existence is composed of energy. So when you practice ritual or you conduct a ritual, what you've essentially done is released energy. Okay? Now, the most important question then becomes, what do you do with that energy? So once you give your ritual an intent, a purpose, then that energy that you're releasing, what its function is to do is to help you manifest that intent. Okay? Again, when science caught up, they created this theory called the conservation of energy or matter, which just basically says that matter or energy can never be destroyed, it only changes form. Which is why, as I've mentioned, your body goes into the earth, you don't disappear, it changes form. And that form allows plants to grow. And then those plants will then give you fruit or food to eat and allow you also to grow. So again, we're living in a kind of complete ecosystem. And this once again reinforces that notion of the cycle of existence. Yeah. The first form is your shrine or your altar, which I covered in the section about destiny, which is that you need this sacred space where you can focus your intent. Because remember what I mentioned again, as I said, your thoughts are not just pictures and recollections. Your thoughts hold potential. Your thoughts are energy. And you know it from when you get that banging headache, or from when you have one of your nerves, you've worried yourself so much, you start getting this like a part of your veins popping out the side of your head. You do these things with just your thoughts. So we kind of really need to get deeply into what potential thoughts hold for us. And our shrines or our altars allow us to have that ability. So as I've said, it doesn't even have to be every day. Just start with even twice a week, where you find 10, 15 minutes to sit down and focus on your shrine. Okay, and on your shrine, it's useful to have two things: fire, that energy that can burn and also give life. You need water, which is the very essence of life. And from when you really kind of want to get very deeply in your practice, if you're like me, where your mind is always so active, you can't focus it, put a bowl of water and stare into the water. You want to give yourself something to focus on. And then you give yourself that mental dialogue, because that mental dialogue becomes very important. That's what allows, as I've said, extra information to come in. So your shrine and your altar, it's useful to have on a shrine where you can some of the four elements of nature, which is earth, wind, fire, and water. Yeah, these 4 elements. But then remember, you're also composed of another element which is not covered in modern science, which is your mind. Your mind or your feelings even. These are all aspects of nature too. So you can have those. You can have pictures of your ancestors if you need to, because this is your space where you connect. But then also remember that even if you live in conditions where you cannot create an altar, your mind is also an altar. Yes, and you can keep these thoughts of your ancestors, of your experience, of your lineage in mind, so you can walk with it. But as someone who's starting, I would absolutely recommend that we have an altar, even if you can find a small wooden box, yes, in which you keep a few items, whether it be crystals, stones, yes, and you walk around with it, and you give yourself that opportunity to bond with that box. You start to see how that energy of concentration starts to now start manifesting in different forms and experiences in your life. Shrines and altars, again, are mainstays across all African traditions. The difference between a shrine and an altar, for those who are not aware, is an altar is your personal space that you make. But in communities where we still practice community dynamics, you will have a custodian or a priest who has a big shrine that serves everyone in that community. So that's just the difference. The altar is just an individualized version of the bigger shrine. Okay, then the next act, a most powerful act, is the act of pouring libation. Okay, now libation as an act, you find it even recorded in some of the religious texts. And people will say, oh yeah, but that is so primitive, so backward. But then again, we do not understand the nature of energy and the nature of how energy changes. So most people are happy just clapping their hands together and just speaking words, thinking they're praying. In Africa, people don't pray. We invoke. That means you bring things into being. And libation is one of the most perfect symbolic representations of this. Because when you're pouring a libation, and a libation is basically having, I recommend water to start off with, having water in a vessel that you pour directly onto the ground. And each time you pour this libation, you invoke what it is that you're desiring to have happen in your life. This act, again, is a microcosm of what? Rainfall. What happens when it rains? We have rain that comes from the sky, fertilizes the earth, and then what happens? We have plants that grow. It gives birth to life. So what you have as libation is a symbolic representation of that rainfall. You are giving life to your ideas. You are giving life to your requests. And as you speak, you give out energy, sound energy. So everything you're asking for, plus the kinetic energy you're exerting with your movements, will all work towards that intent that you're seeking. So libation, as basic as it looks, is one of the most powerful forms of invocation or prayer for those who, we have to put this understanding within what you're comfortable with. Yeah, or prayer forms you can ever have. Yeah, as simple as having a glass of water. If you can wake up early enough, great. So somewhere between what we call 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., if you can go into a park or have access to a garden or even a plant that has soil or earth in it, and just invoke. And again, see the changes that come out as a result. The last one that I will cover, because it covers 3 things really, because they all produce the same type of energy, is dancing, singing, and drumming. The reason why I'm putting all these 3 things together is because we're used to them in a secular space, where you have a rap song that just talks about nothing but some of the most despicable parts of being black. Whereas we could also have music that says all the best things about being black. And the way it will prime and program our minds will be very different. Because one will put you on an ascension and positive path, whereas the other makes you only seek out the worst type of behaviors you can bring forward. So drumming, singing, and dancing are key components. And again, they produce sonic energy or sound energy. And if you haven't really realized the power of sound, if you see even certain singers, people can shatter glass with the pitch of their voice. And this is something that you can't see with your physical eyes, but it can have a physical impact. Yeah? So based on your understanding of the way frequencies work, because again, everything is a frequency, which pretty much also is an energy. Yes? So what you can drum in those 15 minutes or so of your silence, you can either start it off with drumming, because by drumming, you've already done what? You've given out some energy. When you're drumming, you're going to sweat. That is already energy that you've exerted. That energy is now there. It becomes your responsibility to direct it towards that outcome. And again, why we should never underestimate the power of even speaking, because again, as I'm speaking to you now, I'm releasing energy. In the American history, they have this event called the Igbo landing, I believe, where there was a ship carrying a group of enslaved Igbos. And as the story is recorded, these Igbos managed to break their shackles with particular chants. Okay? And these chants, again, we're just talking about sound energy that people are making. We're able to break that physical metallic barrier. I've been in some initiations myself, and these are not things you're allowed to discuss, but I can testify to the power of sound, because the energy that it contains, which is why, look, let's even put it in a context that you're most familiar with. They tell you things like the words you speak to your child will determine the kind of adult they become. And if the child only hears a lot of negative things about themselves, somehow they grow up and fulfill that prophecy. It's not because of anything else, but it's because of the energy you're projecting towards them and how it then shapes their physical reality. So we can use these forms of invocation for various purposes in our life, but really and truly we should direct them towards the purposes we would like to achieve. Okay, so these 3 invocations, I will leave them with you as a starting point, because there are many. And again, for those who might be interested, you can catch up in its fullness in any of our learning resources. We have the Ancestral Voices, Spirit is Eternal book. We have the film. We have the Esoteric African Knowledge film as well, and a range of online courses. So you can go deeper. But the 3 things we've covered so far in terms of our prayer forms or our invocations is you need a shrine and an altar, where every week at least you need to sit down, quieten your thoughts, and direct your thoughts towards something. This is how you start to experience. The second is libation, that act of germinating your ideas, bringing them to life. That is something that you should be doing at least once a week. The third is the sounds and the energies that we produce, whether it's the words that come out of your mouth or drumming activities you might be engaged in, or dancing, which allows more energy, blood flows through your body, so your circulation gets better, which is ultimately good for your health. And then we also have drumming, again, because of the sonic patterns that we can create and how we can use that energy and transmutate it to something that we desire or need in our lives. Okay, and these are not just secular type drumming and singing. Find things that have inspirational words that can motivate you and guide you into positive actions. So this is the third practice that you can incorporate into your life to guide you along your spiritual journey. Because remember, again, African spirituality is not just an intellectual pursuit, but it's how the intellect informs the action for a purpose. So, thank you.
Kush Communiversity is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, The Black Secret. Are you ready to dive deep into Black history, economics, wealth building, and self-empowerment? The Black Secret is offering exclusive courses by none other than the Black history man himself, Robin Walker. This is the most powerful Black studies course on offer for the entire Black world. And guess what? You can get started today by simply using our special link, which you can find in the video description. Be sure to apply our coupon code KIMBUNGA to get another 20% off your membership. And there's more! Want to get a taste of what the Black Secret has to offer? You can also claim the book 100 Black History Facts absolutely free. Link in the description. So what are you waiting for? Expand your mind, unlock a world of knowledge, claim your free book, and let the Black Secret guide you on a journey of discovery and empowerment.
Click on the link below or subscribe to get more information. Class is in session.